Hey, everybody. What is going on? It is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, and we are coming at you. We love to time things up pretty well. Last week, we came on the air to talk about reported announcements of all kinds of different coaching hires, and there's more stuff that hit the wire today, that being Wednesday if you're watching us live, and we'll talk about some interesting comments made by both new coaches, front office staff members, and some other things that the Bengals need to learn. I feel like this is an annual topic we talk about. the stuff that the Bengals need to learn from these Super Bowl teams as they did not make it. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He is John Sheeran. That is a long-winded intro. John, how are you, man?
I'm doing all right. It's a very exciting week. You know, we got a very important game on Sunday, the Pro Bowl games. Very excited about that, but just staying out the way and making sure that Ryan Leaf doesn't dox my address and comes after me next. Or
my gosh, like that guy just can't get out of his own way, man. He's got like 18 comeback stories, and every time he just shoots himself in the foot with stuff. He is an interesting cat, but we've got some cool stuff to talk about at the end of the show too. Fun little announcement, and I don't know, maybe I'll surprise John with a little game we could play there at the end there, but. Let's start things off. The Bengals, last week we said it was reported that the Bengals were hiring Al Golden as their and a couple of other assistant coaches to their defensive coordinator position. That has been official. He has been introduced to the Cincinnati faithful and to the media. He had an introductory press conference, and a lot of people seem to be pretty fired up at some of his comments, John, and not only just on the inspiration side, but also a little bit on the vision and making sure that the Bengals play young, talented players and get the right people out there on the field and, you know, that sort of thing. I guess let's talk with just kind of his overall philosophy, because he used the word development quite a bit. I think that was kind of a key word, and that is one that I think resonated well with Bengals fans and obviously the staff members. They feel that he can be a guy that can develop young talent and get the most out of them.
It is interesting because I feel like every single year when you have a situation like this where it's a notable hire and like the questions that he's asked come from, you know, people who are obviously wanting to know very specific things. And a lot of that is based off of what the predecessor didn't do or kind of fell short of in that regard. And obviously we talked ad nauseum about why the Bengals moved on from Louis Anarumo. And part of it was for the fact that there was a lack of development for the young players on that side of the ball, lack of getting them on the field, a lack of a plan in terms of just from them drafting them to them getting on the field. All that didn't seem as cohesive as it should have been. So naturally, a lot of the conversation I think Al talked for like 30 minutes to the media in his first time there. So a lot of that involved those topics. And naturally, I think Golden said the right things, which is why the common perception from the presser was like, oh yeah, this guy is exactly what they need and everything like that. And I feel like there is part of us that would need to kind of take a step back and realize that he's being asked these things because they were direct issues from, you know, the previous coach, right? So part of it is yes. I think naturally he comes with the qualifications to fix a lot of these problems that they had, But on the other end of the cycle, like those questions and those answers were mainly happening because of the issues that they had. So I think it definitely needs to be taken with a grain of salt and maybe some caution, because there's still a lot that he needs to prove. But he definitely said all the right things, and I think he has the track record for what he did in Notre Dame and getting guys. He used the word on board like a couple times in terms of getting freshmen to play right away, or whether they be transfer players, or just the in and out overall turnover of getting guys acclimated within the system at a really high level really quickly, which is something the Bengals have had issues obviously with their drafting guys, and obviously with their free agency additions that haven't worked out in recent years. So everything that he said in that regard was exactly what needed to be said.
And quote unquote on board could also mean the mental side of things, right? And grasping the philosophies and grasping what they're trying to achieve and making sure that everybody's kind of buying in on what he is preaching on that side of the ball. Again, I think the hesitancy, you talk about how, these were the direct questions he was asked. So that's why he touched on the topics. They did tee him up pretty nicely to touch on these topics. So that's for sure accurate. But, I was impressed for our complaints about the Bengals not really, it felt like they didn't do truly due diligence and go check out a lot of different candidates for this position. I think those concerns were a little bit quelled with what he was saying, at his presser. I think there was a lot of things that you could take away and say, hey, things are looking pretty promising. And now it makes you wonder that some of these players, the younger players that either are coming back from injury, or Dax Hills and DJ Turners, et cetera, and or some of these defensive players who seemingly took a little bit of a step backward after showing some promise. That would be Cam Taylor-Britt and some others on that side of the ball. I mean, I'm that's the kind of group, and granted, they're all secondary players that I mentioned there, but that's the kind of group that I'm particularly looking at, and hopefully, I'm optimistic that he's going to get a little bit more out of them this time around than Lou Anarumo could.
It really all comes down to the preparation in the offseason of getting everyone on the same page, so that when the games do start, then everyone can play fast and free, kind of, akin to how we saw them kind of play at the end, because the ability of the guys in the secondary, I don't think can be questioned. I think that's a very interesting angle to kind of look at it when you're talking about this offseason and what type of additions that they could make. They don't have a lot of able guys left along the defensive line. And there's a question to be had at linebacker too. But I think in the secondary, at both cornerback and safety, you have guys who are capable of playing a lot better than what they did this past year. And I think he comes from a background of making sure that there are clear and concise rules within the scheme, so that everyone kind of plays on the same page, and they're just allowed and they're able to let their athleticism and their playmaking ability kind of flourish without thinking too much. So that's going to be a really big thing. And it really ties in to one of the more impressive things that I heard him say and it was just about just the offseason program in general, to make sure that everything is hammered down and you're playing fast and aggressive. You're practicing at an aggressive rate, so that when the games come around, it's a lot easier. And I think that's part of the equation as to how this team can go from June, July, and August to actually hitting the ground running in September. It's not just on the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, that side needs to be able to, carry its weight too, because it hasn't really been firing on all cylinders in September either. But it's also on the defensive side of the ball. So, when you're talking about changes on that unit specifically, I think Golden's type of resume and his background, I think Notre Dame and what he did there, it proved a lot of that. So that was definitely refreshing to hear, and I think very important to be confirmed in his presser.
That's a great point to bring up. That it was. I don't know if this specific word was. I can't recall if it was specifically used by Golden in the press conference, but it was a lot of pointing to let your instincts take over and not overthink things. And I think there were some allusions to that late last year via guys like Mike Hilton, who kind of said, when things kind of simplified, that's when things got better. Granted, they played, far less capable quarterbacks and teams at certain points down the stretch too. But you could definitely sense a difference at the end of this. And some people thought that was going to save Lou Anarumo's job at some point, but you could sense a difference in that defense when they were playing a little less, I don't know, in their own heads type of thing and playing a little bit more instinctively. And I think that's another theme that Golden hit on, and one that, again, resonated with everybody who listened to him speak.
Yeah. And I think also, we had a question here from Sage Ohio, and he's asking about, like, did he run man at Notre Dame a lot because of the players that he had or the style that he coaches? I think it was kind of a mix of both, because he does blitz a lot. He does send a lot of 5-man pressures, and with that, like, you want to make sure that you're not allowing a lot of separation in those early parts of the routes. So naturally, you want to play man coverage, but also he kind of had the luxury of, being able to recruit guys who kind of fit that profile too. And it's obviously different in the NFL level. And I think part of that is going to be how he kind of adapts his overall defense to the NFL game, and obviously to the personnel that the Bengals have at this point, because I think, DJ Turner kind of fits that mold pretty well. I think Dax can thrive as a man cover corner as well. Maybe Cam Taylor-Britt may not fit in that mold, but there's going to be other things to kind of look at. But no, I think in general, though, like the main takeaway is that it was very clear that Al and the Bengals and Zach were very aligned with what they kind of foresaw this partnership being, and how it was kind of in the making, even before he went to Notre Dame in the first place, right? He was a highly regarded assistant back then when he had a great influence on the defense and everything. And it just seems like all that is kind of carried over in the last 3 years, and how it's kind of now come to fruition now. And now everything is kind of under his vision. And it does seem to be a lot of people being on the same page, which is very good.
Well, all in all, I think it was there were positive feelings that were coming out of that press conference. And I think the Bengals feel, I think there's still that hesitancy of, man, they just kind of went back to the same well of familiarity, and they didn't really go get maybe an outside voice, an outside vision, that sort of thing. But there are positives to familiarity as well. You know what the expectations are, what their vision is, a lot of different things about it. So, and I think a lot of the positives ended up coming through that press conference, instead of when we were talking about the hire, there was a little bit more of a, I don't want to say negative, but there's a little bit of side of cynicism with it, right? I mean, it was just like, oh man, this guy was just here a few years ago. He was an assistant, and now he's here. But I liked what I heard from him. I overall, I think the Bengals are potentially headed in a good direction, and familiarity, not only from a coach to coach standpoint, Golden to Zach Taylor, but familiarity for some of those guys on defense in the locker room that were there with him on defense when he was with the Bengals previously.
Yeah. Familiarity in the sense of when he was here, like it just seemed that they were able to come up with bigger plays at bigger moments, because he was tasked with making sure that those third down packages and those pass rushes, they were hitting, and he had better personnel to work with back then compared to what the Bengals had with Anarumo this past year. And that can't be discounted. And it's going to be very important that he and the front office see eye to eye on how to rebuild this defense from the ground up. But I think it deserves to be reiterated what his whole process and his line of thinking about, hey, when we draft someone, or like when he recruited someone at Notre Dame, there was a plan on how to get him on the field. There was a clear role that his players had. And that's what you see around the NFL. Like the Chiefs are so damn good. The Eagles are so good. It's a wonder as to why both of them are in the Super Bowl. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But the ability to maximize your new players and to not have this long ramp up process to get them on the field and get them acclimated. Like it's not like you're getting an all pro or Pro Bowl level player immediately, but just someone who knows what they're doing and has a clear idea of what their role is. They're not making a huge transition from a different position, but just having a clear vision about who a guy is. And from day one, here's what you're going to do. You're not going to be riding the bench for 2 years, not going to be making position changes, all these other things that just ended up causing him so much trouble over the past couple of years. I think that is still, it's what resonates the most out of me from what he said and what he did at Notre Dame. And it's one of the biggest reasons why I think the Bengals wanted to go ahead and confirm this plan, because he was so good at it with Notre Dame.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, again, were pretty psyched about some of the things that were coming out of his mouth in that introductory press conference. So Al Golden, officially the Bengals defensive coordinator, and now he's taking hold of that position and running with it. And so we'll hopefully see some good improvement on that side of the ball for sure. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, part of the Believe podcast network, also streaming on a variety of different platforms via Believe and via Cincy Jungle and via all kinds of different stuff. So however you may be watching us live or after the fact, appreciate it. You can catch the video side of things on the Cincy Jungle Facebook page. We stream there. We stream on a couple of different X accounts. So appreciate you tuning in live. And we also stream live on our YouTube channel, which you can access via a show icon at the bottom right-hand side of the screen. Click that, click the subscribe, do the bell, do all that kind of stuff to subscribe to the channel. We've got some cool stuff coming up, especially with Super Bowl week. There's some unique things coming up. So we're pretty excited about that. And we'll talk more about that a little later. You can also get this through your favorite audio streamer through the Believe in Cincy podcast channel, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, all the major ones. Our show, 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin, talking football with Bengal Jim and friends. And of course, Matt and Willie No Ball with the coach, Matt Minnick, a newly minted father for the second time. Congrats, Matt and Willie Lutz. They're doing great things there. And of course, I mean, it only took us, 8 years to be official, but we have a sponsor, John, FOCO. And so FOCO is a great resource for unique, Bengals bobblehead, Bengals, all kinds of different stuff. And through this partnership we have with FOCO, there will be various discounts and giveaways and all kinds of fun stuff. So we are pretty excited to talk about that partnership with them and have them on board with us. And keep your eyes and ears open to see what kind of cool stuff they'll have coming for our listeners on this podcast and the Believe in Cincy channel. So pretty excited about that. Let's move on. And I mean, at this point, it's kind of like, well, you might as well just have Kelsey Conway's Twitter account timeline just on loop here, because she is putting out some very interesting and intriguing comments from a conversation she has had with Duke Tobin at the Senior Bowl. So kudos to her, Kelsey Conway from Cincinnati.com and the Inquirer. She sat down with him and chatted about a lot of different things. Where do we want to start? Because Jamar Chase was a topic. Trey Hendrickson was a topic. The defense was a topic. I'm giving you dealer's choice on where you want to start here, John. Which one do you want to start with?
I think I don't want to say least compelling, but I think we can all wrap our minds around the fact that a Jamar Chase extension is a formality. It's not like an if. It's a definite plan that the Bengals are going to take. So I feel like starting with that, just getting it out of the way, is the best way to go about this.
Okay. And Jamar Chase, let's rewind, right? Jamar Chase and the Bengals were trying to get a deal done last year, and even Chase himself alluded to the fact that they were kind of close, right? I mean, it was pretty close as the season approached, and both sides just couldn't get pen to paper, but it was pretty close. Lo and behold, he has a season for the ages. Does Jamar Chase wins the Triple Crown receiving title, and is one of the finalists for Offensive Player of the Year, NFL Offensive Player of the Year, as is his quarterback Joe Burrow. But by the way, side note, I tweeted this out. There's 5 Offensive Player of the Year nominees this year for the NFL Honors Awards and all that kind of stuff. Man, 4 of them are in the AFC North, and 2 apiece are on 2 teams. So really 5, you would expect 5 different players for 5 different teams and scattered across all kinds of different divisions. I mean, it's not that way. It's 3 teams, not 5 different teams. And it's 2 players on the Bengals and 2 players on the Ravens, deservedly so. I found that to be pretty just wild in general. Regardless, Kelsey Conway talked to Duke Tobin in the quote that she has, and there's an article on that you can go look at Cincinnati.com. The quote is, and I'll share it here, her tweet that she put out. I would expect, you've sat down with him too in person, John, Duke Tobin. And so you kind of understand his personality, and he's very careful on how and very conservative on tempering expectations on things. But quote, I would expect that we would come together on something that makes sense for both sides, offers the latest on the Bengals' number 1 priority this offseason, and it's a new deal for Jamar Chase. That's number 1 priority.
Yeah, so he went on to expand on that, saying that it's something that we feel like there's a framework to work off of. It should be pretty easy should be a pretty easy framework to work off of. Guys in his position have recently redone contracts. We believe in Jamar, the whole type of thing. So we believe there's a real framework to work off of. And I would expect that we come together on something that makes sense for both sides. What he's basically saying there is what we all kind of knew going into like training camp of last year and really going into the season. When Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb signed their contracts, the market was set in stone for what they were going to build off of to get Jamar Chase under contract. They couldn't get it done last year, so who knows what this year's price is compared to that. But the structure, the cash flow, the guaranteed money, the money up front, all of those precedents have been set by the number 2 and number 3 eventually wide receiver contracts in the league after Jamar Chase becomes number 1. So this is basically saying that like the blueprint is there. It's just a matter of making the numbers right and getting Chase to sign, because like it's gonna happen. It's like their number 1 priority to getting it happen. There's no excuse for it to not happen, because like I said, like all the numbers, the placeholders are there. It's just a matter of adjusting for cap inflation and just the season that he had. So whatever type of bonuses that you want to throw in there, whatever type of extra money that you want to throw in there, there's something to work off of here. And that's why I think there's a lot more confidence in him talking about this deal, maybe compared to others, because again, it's just not going to be that crazy of a negotiation because there's something to work off of.
So yeah, and oddly enough, I haven't looked at the whole thing yet. I don't know that T. Higgins a focal point of the conversation. Yeah, that was not a focal point of the conversation, but the defense was, as was Jamar Chase, and just to kind of tie a bow around the Jamar Chase topic, obviously that is the number 1 priority, and it's even more urgent this time around because of the season he just had. So, I mean, I think now it's like there's going to be a pretty big uprising from the fans if the Bengals do not get something done after the kind of season that Jamar Chase just put forth for the Bengals. And I mean, really the best individual season ever by a Bengals wide receiver. And like I said, receiving Triple Crown winner. So let's transition. We just talked about the defense. Let's transition there. This is kind of an interesting, and now she didn't post that one we quoted was a direct quote from Duke Tobin on this tweet here. These aren't direct quotes from Tobin. They were just kind of relayed from Kelsey Conway. But again, there's an article on Cincinnati.com where you can find this stuff and direct quotes. But Duke Tobin was honest where he felt like the Bengals' shortcomings were last year. The biggest takeaway I had from my conversation with him was that they tried to keep the core of the Super Bowl defense together and now realize they held on to a few players too long. I don't really buy into that. The Super Bowl defense had Larry Ogunjobi. They had, Jesse Bates. There's a lot of guys there where you say, man, you kind of let a lot of talent walk out of the door there. I mean, they tried to their credit to re-sign Larry Ogunjobi. He ended up signing a big deal with the Bears and then didn't get his injury clearance there to have that contract go through. And then he's been with the Steelers really kind of since. So, I mean, and then we know Bates, who's been playing at an all-pro level for the Falcons since leaving the Bengals. But there is a sentiment of that, but they also let Von Bell walk out the door. Granted, that reunion this year was not what it had planned to be. Bates, Ogunjobi, I mean, the list goes on and on there. So I don't know how much I buy into that necessarily.
Yeah, I think that opinion was shared for a lot of people. The quote that Kelsey put attached to that later was, quote, "I think the expectation was keeping those guys together with net, and it didn't. And maybe I need to influx. Maybe I need to change more of that going in. But we ran it back with a lot of guys, and it just didn't come together." But you're right. I mean, Reeder was out the door. Bates was out the door. The guys that they did bring back, like it was Jermaine Pratt, Von Bell for a year. Was holding on to Sam Hubbard maybe for a little bit too long. Maybe that was part of it too. I think it does speak to like there's going to be some tough decisions about the mainstays in this defense that probably aren't going to be around much longer, and that includes Hubbard and Pratt. But yeah, it was an interesting quote. It's hard to really gauge it without actually hearing him say it and everything like that, because there's some context that we're missing. But yeah, when I talked to Duke 5 years ago, it is very hard to control the conversation when you're talking to him. He wants to control the narrative as much as possible. And he'll lead his answers with, I don't want to say just useless jargon, but like he'll lead it with, a lot of just kind of fluff, and then he'll kind of eventually answer the question as his answer kind of goes on. And I think part of that is just, him making sure that he doesn't say anything that, comes, like foot and ass or whatever you want to say. But yeah, it's just, he's just a weird guy to talk to. And I think he's very calculated with what he says. And sometimes it just doesn't translate to the everyman, if you will.
There is not a lot of tipping of the hand from Duke Tobin. That is for sure. And it's, again, very level-headed speak. And sometimes it's optimistic and sometimes it's frustrating because it's the answers are fluid. we'll put it that way. One other thing, and this was another issue that was from last offseason. Trey Hendrickson had I don't know. I don't even know if you want to call it a holdout. It was like a mini holdout. He wanted a new contract. And yet again, here we go again. Another Bengals player that is, had an amazing statistical season last year for the Bengals. And then, now again, that you're gonna approach this same topic this offseason about an extension for him. He earned it. He is one of the best defensive players in all of the NFL. Duke Tobin basically more or less has said he's earned a new deal. It's just to be determined if we can agree on one. And that's where one of those frustrating quotes kind of comes in, where you just go, man, you acknowledge the greatness. So where's the reward for the greatness? And I understand he's getting up there in age a little bit, but there are no signs of Trey Hendrickson slowing down as he, gets up there in age. And he is a highly, highly valuable player for the Bengals.
Yeah, I mean, let's just put this how it is. Like, this is a contract and a profile that the Bengals have shied away from for the better part of 7 years. Really goes back to Carlos Dunlap and Geno Atkins. Last time they paid someone around that age, third contract, big money, expecting, to reap the reward of it. Neither of those contracts ended up panning out in the long run, right? Both of them were released. One of them was traded because he kind of went off the deep end, but that's a whole nother story. Obviously, Hendrickson is a clear exception to the rule. He should be the favorite to win Defensive Player of the Year. He probably won't win it, but he's an All-Pro. He's one of their first All-Pros in 10 years, along with Jamar Chase. Clearly, exception to the rule, like I just said, and that's why he should be treated differently in this regard. But I thought that was the most interesting comment that he made, outside of him saying, like, I need to maybe change the way that I do things in terms of building the roster, which is what we just talked about, because, like you said, Trey is absolutely worth it, but can they get off of their own precedent here? Can they get off of can they move past the mistake that they made with both Dunlap and Geno and giving those guys contracts, and just recognize that Trey is an entirely new case, a unique case on his own? And the fact that, like, like you said, he wanted another raise last year after he got the extension from 2023. And they decided that, no, like, we got you under this deal. You're going to play under this deal and you're not going to be traded. And that was that. And then, just like Jamar, he just totally popped off and just proved to them that, yeah, I am worth this new money. And obviously he is. So there's nothing else that they can build around on the defensive side of the ball with their own guys. It would send a strong message to the rest of the team that, yeah, if you play at a high level, you will be rewarded as such. And it requires, an actual grown-up contract in order to pay this guy and to make him happy. And that's what he deserves. And Trey has always been kind of like, I feel like his personality meshes well with the organization as a whole. He's very team first. Obviously he wants to be compensated, but I think he's very far from like a diva, if you want to use that type of verbiage. So I think there's, they're kind of on the same level there in terms of communication, everything like that, which is why this could get done. But it is going to be a very unique case here because of, like we just talked about, and how this isn't a guarantee, even though by all accounts it should be.
Yeah, they got to find a way to keep him through, the next couple of years, because I still think he's going to be highly, highly productive over the next couple of years. And then the other kind of comment that Kelsey Conway of the Inquirer, Cincinnati.com, notes is actually one on Joe Burrow. I don't know how much time we want to spend on this, save for the fact that, they meet, apparently Duke Tobin meets with Burrow before every offseason gets underway, type of thing. And that way there's a vision that's shared with their franchise quarterback. And I think that maybe we're going to talk about lessons learned in just a second, but that's probably a lesson learned by the Bengals and their front office with the Carson Palmer situation, that, hey, we need to appease our franchise quarterback. We need to make sure that he knows what we are trying to do, the players we are identifying in free agency in the draft, the positions we are identifying in free agency in the draft. And hopefully that's not a monologue, that's a dialogue, right? Where Burrow can give his feedback and say, give me T. Higgins. I want him back. We need to have him back. Or, you better do whatever the hell you can to extend Jamar Chase, or both, So that was something that I found, again, if the lack of a urgent set of words for the Trey Hendrickson extension was frustrating, I found this to be kind of more optimistic and potentially something that the team has learned since the 2010-2011 debacle with Palmer.
Yeah, and I would imagine this is not the first time that they've done this after a season, especially because, they paid him, the season prior. So naturally, once you're locked into the future, you're going to have a pretty important say, considering you're making more money than 99.99999% of players in the NFL. So that's definitely part of it. Obviously, it's like you said, it's only a good thing because you don't want to keep him out of the loop. The way that they communicate, or I guess going beyond just, hey, Joe, what is your feedback with how we built the team and what do you want to see going forward? Obviously, Joe is not in charge of actually spending the money and negotiating these contracts. So naturally, he's going to be like, yeah, I want us to keep the best players. And I'm sure that the Bengals would also want to keep their best players, but I don't know if they can actually give Joe a promise that yeah, we are 100% going to keep T. Higgins because you said that he is a need. I think it's more yeah, we will make a strong effort to keep T. Higgins. And if T and his new agency decide that our offer is still not good enough, how are the Bengals going to proceed after that? And this goes in with Trey Hendrickson perfectly. Are they going to be so concerned about winning the negotiation this time instead of just maybe giving away a little leeway in order to keep whatever remains of their core together and actually making sure that their franchise quarterback's demands have been received? Now, obviously, if it's something crazy, if T and Trey are just asking for contracts that no other team would actually even entertain, that's a whole nother story. That's not likely. It's never really that case, but it's still somewhat of a possibility. If the demands are so out there where it would be reasonable for the Bengals to decline, there's a reason to understand it. But I think the main fear is that the Bengals can say however much they want about how much they want to keep T. Higgins and how much they want to keep Trey Hendrickson. And that may be the plan, to keep all three. And I do believe that is the plan. How much further are they willing to go to make sure that happens? Are they going to make sure that that those guys don't leave without them at least strongly considering a very fair and reasonable offer? Is it going to get to that point? That is the biggest question over the next month.
Well, again, kudos to Kelsey Conway for getting kind of the inside scoop on a lot of different things with Duke Tobin and sharing some insight. He's keeping other things close to the vest, but sharing some insight on the Bengals' plans for the offseason and heading into 2025. Before we get to some other things, real quickly, Mr. Whisper says, with the unfortunate nature, super chat, this was Mr. Generosity. Thank you. With the unfortunate nature of Erick All's injury, what is the likelihood the Bengals look to the draft/free agency for a young contingency plan to mold in case All isn't the same promising player? I think there probably is going to be someone in the draft, is my guess. Even though he's kind of hybrid wide receiver tight end, I wouldn't be surprised if the Bengals want Gesicki back after the year he had with them. But I know it's easy to count, and I know there's another person in here, Sinister One, that says I have a hard time All will be the same player after enduring 2 ACLs to the same leg. Look, we had, if you remember, I don't want to count this guy out, and we thankfully had him on the show, great young man, but remember how we were all like, this guy's already returning to practice? And not only returning to practice and playing in the preseason and playing at the beginning of the season, but doing some awesome things. So granted, it's not great when it's the same leg, the same injury, all of that. I don't really want to count this kid out as to, career done or not being the same guy or anything like that, because of what he showed just last summer. So I think again, super unfortunate. I think he was kind of a fun part of the offense and a new dynamic to the offense this year. I'm not ready to write him off, but I do think the Bengals are going to replenish that tight end well to some degree this year.
Yeah, I'm certainly not counting out that he's going to play again. I think I wouldn't disregard it completely, because it is it is a rare thing, I think, to kind of re-tear the same ACL twice in a matter of 13 months, which we kind of take it for granted nowadays, because ACL tears are not as severe as they used to be. Guys can almost return close to 6 months now. 9 months is typically that normal recovery time, which is how long it took from Erick All to recover from his first ACL tear. And you would have thought that, yeah, if he were to kind of go through the same thing, he would be on track to maybe return for August. But the whole thing is he's got to have two, because there's complications with the previous surgery, and neither of us are going to pretend to know what all that means and to give a likelihood or percentage chance that he's going to be the same player again, because honestly, we don't know. And September 2026 seems like so long away from here, but that's probably the soonest that we're going to see Erick All on the field again. And the Bengals can't obviously count on, that happening without doing nothing. So obviously they're going to add bodies to that position. I think it's still a little too early to tell, when in the draft they're going to look at a tight end. Maybe we can talk about expanding their horizons in free agency beyond just Mike Gesicki, who, like you said, is going to be probably a priority to be brought back anyways, regardless of Erick All's health. But yeah, I'm not going to say that he's done completely in the NFL, but it is a very stark and dark reminder that it's not a guarantee that, guys will return on time from these injuries, and there will be no complications. Whenever these guys do get hurt, it does make you kind of hold your breath a little bit. But man, I think we can both agree we're just absolutely gutted for this kid, for everything that he's had to overcome with just in the past couple of years throughout his whole life. It's just, I haven't really been taken aback by news about a Bengals player in quite some time until I heard this, because he's just such a fun player and such a great kid.
Yep. And again, go check out the interview. He stayed with us for a while, I think 25 minutes after practice. He hung out with us in his car. And it was fun talking to him. Great kid. And, I don't want to count him out again. That's not what I'm doing with this, but I do want to also note that I was big on Tanner McLaughlin as a tight end, and I know Daniel Jeremiah was as well going into the draft, and so I'm interested to see what year two holds for him, if anything, for the Bengals. Promising guy, even though they use a kind of later day 3 pick, but a lot of people were high on him, just a well-rounded tight end, McLaughlin. So I'm wondering if he's going to have a bigger role going forward. Hudson had some nice moments, but he also had the big fumble, all that kind of stuff. So we'll see. It's going to be maybe that alludes to what Tobin talked about with Kelsey Conway about, realigning his vision for the roster and what they want to do at that position, because it's kind of up to last year, it was kind of ignored. So I mean, they need to figure something out, but let's move on quickly and talk about lessons needing to be learned. And we'll say that this is presented by FOCO, our new partner here. So lessons needed to be learned, because people also need to learn about FOCO and the cool products that they have at foco.com. So, by the way, do you know, I said last week, do you remember what FOCO stands for? Do you know,
actually,
John?
I may know, but maybe our listeners don't. So if you do so kindly as to,
I think it's fans. I think it stands for Fans Only Company is what it stands for.
There you
go. So there's really, they've got some really cool stuff in there, different stuff than you would find in some other places. Really neat stuff. So go check out foco.com for some stuff. But to me, John, I mean, this is just, a really broad statement as a lesson that I think the Bengals need to learn from both the Eagles and the Chiefs. It's aggression and going and getting the players that you want. Don't sit back in free agency. And granted, the Bengals, we've talked about this a ton. They have been far more active in outside free agency since Zach Taylor has arrived in Cincinnati than previously. But, we still see a little bit of a hesitant nature in terms of going up and getting the guy in the draft. We still see, man, that this guy could really, help out your roster. And they kind of man, this is a glaring improvement here in free agency, and they kind of just wait, and then that player gets snatched up. And you look at a team like the Eagles, who got Saquon Barkley, who had a historic season as a running back. I mean, you could look at also the Ravens in this respect too. Derrick Henry and their acquisition of him, and the Eagles also AJ Brown, not necessarily this offseason, but recently. Chiefs going and just identifying the players that they want. To me, it's just be an aggressive team. Be an aggressive team that shows that you want to win.
100%. The Bengals made the Super Bowl a few years ago because they had as close to a perfect of an offseason as you could have imagined in 2021. And like their free agency signings weren't necessarily the same as the Eagles just did, but they didn't miss. And they obviously got instant impact from their top player in the draft. Eagles went out and got Zach Bond and Saquon Barkley in a matter of like an hour, I think, in one of the first days of free agency. Yep. One of them is Defensive Player of the Year finalist. One of the other one is the Offensive Player of the Year finalist. It is insane that sentence exists and is real, but it is. And the fact that the Eagles were already a really good team built around and how those guys would end up fitting in those respective units. So that certainly didn't hurt necessarily, but the Eagles have always been, like you said, aggressive in free agency, and they don't let money in the traditional way kind of get in the way of things. Because one of the things that Duke Tobin said about Trey Hendrickson was, well, you can't have players at the top of the payroll at every position. And it hasn't really stopped the Eagles. Like, they have two receivers who are paid pretty handsomely, along with a $50 million a year quarterback and a running back that's paid $13 million a year, like I forget his last name, for the Giants general manager, though, who I'm sure is kicking himself after letting Saquon Barkley walk. He was famously said that we're not going to pay Saquon Barkley $12 million a year, and we're not going to pay Daniel Jones $40 million a year to hand off to a $12 million a year running back. Well, when the rest of your team is built up through the draft in a smart way because you're identifying the right talents there, you can afford to do that, and you can afford to move money around to make sure that guys are getting paid handsomely and you're applying to the cap. So don't ever let these people, and specifically Dukes, tell you that they can't afford these things, because the Eagles are the perfect example of how to make sure that you're not letting money getting in the way of paying your top stars. And when it comes to the draft, man, they let Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean just fall to them. Like, obviously cornerback was a big need for them, but they didn't mess around. They looked at who the best players were available on the board. They identified the right things to look for in college prospects. You're talking about production and athleticism, making sure that the tape matches too. Both of those guys had all three boxes checked, and that's just how they go about with the draft, which is why they rarely miss. And yeah, they're just the model franchise in terms of just building a team from the ground up.
Yeah. What about what's one for you, a lesson that you think the Bengals should be learning here by looking at these two teams in the Super Bowl?
I really do think it's just about the money. Like, the Eagles are the perfect example of how to make sure that, like, you can keep all your stars, and like it's not a hindrance. It's not an excuse that you can just kind of lean back and say, yeah, like, this is just not really going to happen. If it's not going to happen with you, it's a you problem. It's a way that you manage your money, and it's not something that any team in the NFL is looking to emulate. Everyone's looking to emulate the Eagles. The only team maybe who's not is the Bengals, for whatever reason.
Yep. There's some good ones in here. Sage, Ohio. This is a good one. Learn how to flop or get calls from the refs. I mean, yeah, okay. That's a good one. I like that. I don't know if this was our buddy Jason Von Stein here. I don't know if this was in response to this directly, but I think we need another running back showing, the running back talent on both of those teams. This is a good one here. Basically, trenches. Andrew Woods. Both those teams know what they're doing, and the players they draft are high quality players. They seem to have good trenches, both offensive and defensive lines for both teams, and guys that can get after the quarterback often and from different spots. And that is a big deal. And then the other thing too, and I'm primarily speaking, it's both teams, but I'm primarily speaking about the Chiefs because we've been kind of harping on the Eagles a bit more, is team speed. When you've got Pacheco, and a couple of years ago when the Chiefs traded away Tyreek Hill, they're going, oh man, they're going to lose all this speed. Well, they have Worthy now. They are able to manufacture what Tyreek Hill gave them production wise for the most part by committee, by different players and by different things, and they've just recreated that production in different ways. Not saying that Tyreek Hill is replaceable, because he's a very, very good player, but they were able to kind of do that, and they brought in, Pacheco, and who runs like he absolutely hates the grass, by the way. I mean, the way he runs, but him and, you've got Worthy on the outside, and then, you've got Devontae Smith on the other side. So, I mean, they are teams that are built with speed around them. And I think not only if you have a good vision, you've got good trenches, if you've got outside speed or skill position speed, that always helps you.
Yeah. And like the Chiefs were like you said, like they dealt with, trading away Tyreek because they didn't want to pay him and they had to kind of work around that. But they are, I think, the gold standard of, like we talked about, just making sure that you're identifying like where your draft picks are going to go on the team, like what roles they're going to fill, and how they can kind of evolve as their careers, at least early on, kind of progress. Like Trent McDuffie, George Karlaftis, they both hit the ground running immediately. They're now cornerstone pieces of that team. Xavier Worthy, when he played the Bengals in week 2, is not the same player that he is now. He's arguably the number 1 receiver, and the way that they've developed him and kind of empowered him as the season has kind of gone on, it's very similar to Rashee Rice of last year, where his role as a rookie early on was a little bit different than how it kind of finished in his rookie season. And by the time they got to the Super Bowl, he kind of looked like a completely different player. And it's kind of the same with Xavier Worthy. They're just so good at identifying these guys' strengths and just putting them in the best possible solutions, spots, because that's how you sustain success from a roster standpoint. If you decide not to pay everyone, which sometimes eventually, like you can't actually pay everyone. It does get to a certain limit and you have to make some tough decisions. So it's so crucial to always be able to replenish in the draft. And they're constantly picking in the 20s and 32 all the time. So it's not an excuse for them to say, oh, we're not going to be able to get the elite talents. No, they find them anyways, because there are elite talents that can be drafted all over the draft. Just making sure that you have the right eyes looking at it.
Yeah. Well, and it's no coincidence that these two teams, especially as of recently, have been to multiple Super Bowls apiece and have been to multiple playoff runs, all kinds of different stuff. So here we go. It's probably going to be a pretty entertaining Super Bowl, I would think. Hopefully, a lot of points and all that kind of stuff. We will see, though. Unfortunately, for Bengals fans, yes, the Chiefs did make it once again. That's a tough pill to swallow, but some lessons the Bengals need to learn from both of these teams. And that little segment was presented by Foco, our new partner. Let's drop the mic and get out of here. We've got one cool thing that, and I'm not going to say specifically who yet, but I'm just going to say this: we are lining up a big guest next week, and by big I mean multiple senses of the word. A big guest for this show as part of Super Bowl week coverage, etc. So once we secure that, keep an eye on at Bengals OBI, Cincy Jungle, John and My's account, all that kind of stuff, to find out who that is. But sounds like there's good interest on that, and we're just lining up a when for next week, so we'll let you know when that hits. But fun announcement. I know it's a little vague. I'm pulling a Duke Tobin here. I'm keeping it a little close to the vest a little bit, but it sounds like there's good interest on that, and it'll be a fun interview, I think. So keep your eyes and ears open for that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I'm just gonna touch on something that we didn't cover, but it did happen earlier this week. Bengals hired a linebackers coach, Mike Hodges, from the New Orleans Saints. And I was waiting on this news because obviously with Al Golden in his background being a linebackers coach, you would figure that this hire would be pretty important. And I think the Bengals got it right here. Coming from New Orleans, they've always had quality linebacker play for the past 10 years under Dennis Allen. He's been there. I think Hodges was with the Saints from going all the way back to 2018, and then he became the linebackers coach kind of in 2020 or around that time. But like Demario Davis comes to mind as someone who's always yeah, right. So like maximizing linebacker talent has never really been the Saints' issue, and I think Hodges has been a really critical component of that under Dennis Allen. So that's a really inspiring hire, I would say. The connection is he was at Texas A&M as a player when Zach Taylor was a grad assistant, like in the late 2000s, and I think he was eventually like some type of a strength assistant right after his playing days. So it was actually Zach, I think, who had the connection, not Al Golden, for Al Golden's latest hire. So really, really intrigued by that decision. I think a lot of Saints fans were hoping that he stayed on staff, but now he's with the Bengals.
What's crazy to me, Demario Davis is a great example. I'm glad you mentioned his name. Not a lot of people talk about him. You know what's crazy to me? Demario Davis just finished his God Almighty 13th year last year, and he is 35 years old currently. John, at age, he's been with the team since 2012. I'm talking first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years in the league, no Pro Bowls. He made a Pro Bowl in 22 and 23, and he got his first All-Pro nomination at age 30, a second team All-Pro the next 2 years at age 31 and 32, and then both Pro Bowl and second team All-Pro nominations in 22 and 23. So, I mean, the guy is like fine wine. Man, it gets better with the age, and to me, collecting those accolades in your early and mid 30s is crazy.
Right, it's very akin to Willie Anderson, right? Because he didn't get any recognition until later in his career too. And it's not like the Saints were like a poverty team for the 2010s; like they were always competitive. So, but again, like Demario, I think is someone who kind of overachieved and ended up being like a much better player than expected. And I think part of that is also due to coaching. So I'm interested to see how Hodges can kind of take this linebacker group and see what he can do.
Yeah, good job on you to bring that up. But at any rate, we're going to get out of here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in live, and we will catch you all later. Take care, and we will see you soon.